Hello and good morning and welcome back to the brutal capitalist dictatorship of Kuala Lumpur. Hope you're having an amazing day, because if you're having an amazing day, I'm having an amazing day. And if I'm having an amazing day, you should be having an amazing day. As you can see, this is the first time in the history of my channel when I'm wearing glasses. Yes, believe it or not, I do wear glasses, but this is the first time I'm doing it on camera. You see, because I don't want to look like a dumb Chinese meathead anymore. No, I want to look like an Asian American model minority. Yeah, so that's why I've put on glasses. But also, glasses simply help you to see the world more clearly, right? You know, you become so much more aware of your surroundings and so much more aware of the intricate little details you see around you. Yes, that's why I like wearing glasses. But unfortunately, glasses don't really flatter my face, so I don't really wear them very often when I'm not teaching. So for those of you who are not aware, this place is the Lake Gardens of Kuala Lumpur. And it's basically the oldest public park in Malaysia, right? It was established in the 1880s by the Brits because, you know, every colonizer needs a safe space from the natives, right? Just like, you know, Israel was established by the Zionists because they didn't want to mix around with the natives, right? But the point is, you see, this place is one of the best places you can possibly come if you want to go jogging, if you want to, you know, just walk around for some light exercise, savor the sights and sounds. This place is excellent because it's peaceful, it's quiet, and it's free of charge, of course. It's one of the last bastions of public property we have left under capitalism before they start privatizing these places, yeah? So yeah, enjoy it while it lasts, because pretty soon we're going to be paying like 10, 20 ringgit to enter, you know, when the evil corporatists get their hands on this place. Yes, so enjoy it while it lasts. Some of these trees, you know, they've been around since British times, you know. These are very, very old trees. They've been around since the 1800s, right? This is possibly one of the few remaining historical relics you have in Kuala Lumpur left. And honestly, it's one of my favorite places because it's, you know, you get to retreat from the hustle and bustle of Kuala Lumpur. Hello, Mr. Cat. And it's very nice and peaceful, right? There's a cat over here. Hello. Hi. Meow, meow, meow. 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 Okay, see you. Goodbye. So anyway, you get to retreat from the hustle and bustle of Kuala Lumpur, and you get to enjoy some peace and serenity for once. And I like to come here. If I have a free hour or so, I'll just come here just to hang out. a bit, right? Good place, very, very good place. So any visitor to this public park will notice that it has a very, very unique layout because it is really an amalgamation of many different things from all over the world, right? You have plants that are not native to Malaysia, but rather native to India or Africa. And even these pigeons, you see these pigeons behind me? Well, these most likely are not Malaysian pigeons, but rather descendants of pigeons that were brought over by the British colonizers, right? So this park is a unique amalgamation of traits from many different regions of the world. And if I were to describe Malaysia's cultural makeup, I could say the same about Malaysia's cultural makeup, right? Malaysia is really a very, very unique amalgamation of many different cultural layers that form one large cake lapis, which means layer cake in Malaysia. I'm going to use the metaphor of a cake lapis because a layer cake is basically a cake with many different layers, many different colors, and Malaysia is basically like a layer cake in a sense, right? I think we are very fortunate to enjoy Chinese culture, Malay culture, Indian culture, Arabian culture, and even European culture because of the European influence as a result of the unfortunate years of colonization, right? I wouldn't describe ourselves as a melting pot, right? Because a melting pot would imply that everybody assimilates into a dominant culture, right? Like the United States of America, where all minorities are expected to assimilate into this so-called American culture, which basically means 19th century white Anglo-Saxon Protestant culture. That's what they mean by American culture. They certainly don't mean the culture of the Native Americans when they say American culture, right? But I wouldn't describe Malaysia as a melting pot because Malaysia is still far more culturally diverse than just a simple melting pot, right? Malaysia is a complex society with people from various backgrounds who, under all other historical circumstances, would not have been drawn to each other, right? But due to colonization, people from China, India, and all other parts of Asia were somehow drawn together in one region, right? And regardless of what the reactionaries are saying, regardless of what the reactionaries like Mahathir are saying, when they tell us to assimilate into the so-called Malay culture, which is itself a very questionable concept, right? What they mean is just conservative, right-wing, austere Islamic culture. Regardless of what the reactionaries say, I think that our diversity is really a blessing rather than a curse, right? Although the reactionaries don't think so. I think it's wonderful that in the morning I can have nasi lemak, which means coconut rice. That's a traditional Malay dish. In the afternoon I can have chap fan, which means rice and dishes, Chinese dishes, mixed rice, sort of like Chinese takeaway. And in the evening I can have Indian thosai, which is a crispy South Indian pancake, right? And you know, this diversity that we have, I think, is something extremely precious and extremely valuable, and I don't think anyone, not the reactionaries, not anybody, has a right to take this diversity away from us, right? So I think we should defend our diversity and defend our right to have our own cultures, right? Now, I myself am a Peranakan, which is, a descendant of the Chinese sailors who came to the Malay Peninsula a few hundred years ago, who married local Malay women and assimilated. So I didn't go to Chinese school, so I don't speak any Mandarin, right? I don't speak any Hokkien either, because my grandfather didn't think it's an important enough language to teach me, right? So I am sometimes accused by the Chinese ultra-reactionaries in Malaysia. There are also reactionaries who are sort of like ultra-Chinese nationalists in Malaysia of being a self-hating whitewashed banana. But I assure you, I have no hostility to the Chinese vernacular schools. I have no hostility to the Chinese culture. It's just that my culture is the culture of Nusantara, or Southeast Asia, right? That's just my culture. I don't have anything against you having your own Han Chinese culture, right? But the point is, yeah, our diversity is our strength, and I think it's something that's precious and something that gives vibrance to Malaysia and something that makes it all the more interesting than a homogeneous country, in my opinion, right? Of course, people who disagree would say that, you know, if you want to avoid racial tensions, you've got to assimilate to the dominant culture. But to me, that's like saying, you know, that's basically like the white American right-wing argument that, you know, all migrants have got to assimilate to the white American Anglo-Saxon culture. But then that would be a boring society, wouldn't it, if everyone was the same? But then there arises the question as to what the dominant culture will be then, if Malaysia has many different types of people and many different races and religions and cultural norms that are practiced. What then will be the dominant culture of this region, right? Because, you see, socialism seems to work more easily in places that are homogeneous, right? In places that are, well, more or less homogeneous, like Korea, for example, or China. Now, China is a country with around 56 or 57 different ethnicities, but that doesn't mean that, you know, it doesn't mean that socialism could not take off there, because, well, it's still homogeneous, and this is going to offend some people. It's still homogeneous in the sense that everybody agrees upon a certain notion of Chineseness, the notion of Minzu, right? Now, so everyone in China, despite the fact that they have different cultural practices, that they are different ethnic groups, there are about 57 different ethnic groups in China, everybody agrees upon this idea of a certain Chinese national consciousness, right? A certain common shared historical trajectory that everyone is following, right? And that, to me, seems to be the natural course of events for Malaysian socialism, right? Because the question that people have is, if Malaysia is such a diverse country with people of varying interests and varying cultures, how can you put in socialism when we can't even agree on what the national language ought to be, right? Now, this is something that might be quite surprising, but many people are not aware that most left-wing Chinese in the 1940s actually wanted Malay to be the dominant language of Southeast Asia, right? Most left-wing Chinese were quite happy for Malay to be the unifying language. Not Mandarin, not English, but Malay. Because, you see, at the time, the idea was to unite the people of Malaysia. Malaya, pardon me, back then it was called Malaya. And, you know, even socialist leaders like Chin Peng or Lim Chin Siong, for example, spoke very, very good Malay, right? And so most people nowadays would be quite surprised to hear that, right? Because the defending of Malay as the national language nowadays is associated with right-wing Malay feudal reactionaries, right? especially in UMNO, United Malays National Organization. So back then, it would be quite surprising for many Malaysians today to know that, yeah, most left-wing Chinese of the colonial era actually agreed that Malay ought to be the official language of Malaysia, right? Not English, Malay, or I should say the medium of communication, right? Now, of course, for the liberals, for the Western liberals, and that is to say the elite strata of the English-speaking community in Malaysia, this is a regressive step, because from the liberals' point of view, Malay is not an international language. From the liberals' point of view, Malay cannot serve you in the realm of business, science and technology, and it makes more sense for English to be the main spoken language at school, right? And for Malay to be like a mother tongue language, spoken, at home, among the family, right? And Lee Kuan Yew, the Prime Minister of Singapore, was one of those people, actually. He believed that, you couldn't really make a living off of Malay, or even, any other Asian language at the time. So Lee Kuan Yew put a lot of priority into English language education, right? And so it's clear as day to anyone that the standard of English in Singapore is higher than the standard of English in Malaysia, right? I don't mean to bash down on my own countrymen, but it's just the case. Although Malaysia is one of the most fluent nations in English when we're talking about Southeast Asia, because most people in Malaysia, even if their English isn't perfect, at least speak it at a decent level of fluency, right? Enough to be understood by anyone, right? Because, after being colonized for 200 years, you don't get out of this not speaking any English, right? See, the Western liberal point of view, which emphasizes prioritizing the English language, did make sense in the colonial era because, well, English was the language of the colonizers, and the colonizers were the big bosses, right? And if you wanted any hope of upward mobility, well, you had to learn the language of the bosses, right? Of course, times are changing, and nowadays people are realizing that if they want any hope of upward mobility on a global scale, they've got to learn at least a bit of Mandarin. Even I have to learn a bit of Mandarin because my clients do speak Mandarin, right? And I'm an English teacher, and I can't expect my clients, my students' parents, many of whom come from China, to learn English for my sake, right? So that's why, as a form of courtesy to my clients, I do learn. I am studying some Mandarin, right? I can speak Mandarin at a child's level, of course. I'll never speak it fluently, but I'll be able to speak it, at the level of a child, enough to communicate with another person, right? But see, this mentality, this frame of mind that, English is the most important language in the world, and everyone in Asia must master English at all costs, is really an outdated colonial mentality, with all due respect to those who still have that mentality. Many of the Malaysian boomers from the 1940s and 1950s, right, who were born in that era, really still staunchly believe in that mentality, especially if they were educated by British teachers, right? Because in their time, English was seen as a means for upward mobility. In fact, all of the aristocracy spoke Queen's English. I'll show you a video of our former Prime Minister, Tunku Abdul Rahman, who was a prince himself, speaking in Queen's English, speaking with an accent that can only be described as more British than a current day's British accent. Take a look.
Do you think there is a serious threat of communism in this part of the world?
Well, as you know, the threat is very, very serious. Even at this moment, they are using an army of something like 20,000 people in Vietnam to try and overrun Vietnam. And if Vietnam, things get very bad there, it's bound to have repercussion here. And the next thing, before we know where we are, we'll find the communists here.
Do you plan to form a non-communist or an anti-communist Malaysia?
Well, I have made my stand quite clear, and that is that Malaya is anti-communist. Therefore, if we have Malaysia, that means the Malaysia as a country, as a nation, is anti-communist.
What is your position about the use of the British bases here for CETO purposes?
Well, I've made my views quite known about that. We are not in Seattle, therefore the bases here cannot be used for Seattle defense or any of the Seattle purposes. We, Malaya and Britain, have a defense treaty by which the bases here can be used for Commonwealth defense purposes. That means for Commonwealth purposes, but not for Seattle.
So why do you feel CETO is out of date?
In the first place, Seattle is supposed to be a defense pact between the countries of Southeast Asia. Actually, there are only two countries of Southeast Asia in this Seattle. These are Thailand and Philippines. Secondly, by having this organization, you're putting the communists on guard. And so whatever plan you have, you can take for granted the communists is bound to know about it. If you see the communists themselves, they have no such organizations as Seattle or anything like that. They have a strong understanding among the communist country to work together for the benefit of the communist nations. And I think the same thing can be done with regard to countries within the Western Bloc.
So what are you hoping to gain from your visit to London?
Well, there's a lot to be gained because, as you know, Britain is the ruler of these territories like Singapore and the Borneo territories. And before Malaysia can come into being, it must necessarily have the understanding, the goodwill, and the agreement of Great Britain to pass the sovereignty over these territories to themselves and to join us afterwards. And that's the idea of going to London to have a talk with the British Prime Minister and the other ministers of the British Cabinet. And my hope is that we don't want to grope about in the dark because we know what has to be done in respect to those territories. If they are going to be given independence, then the only country that can say so will be Britain, Great Britain.
And supposing the British government takes the line that the Borneo territories just aren't yet ready for independence because they don't have a civil service structure to run the country?
If they take that line, I think they'll be making a very big mistake because they took the same line with us. When we asked for independence, the British say, you haven't got the officers to run the civil service, you haven't got that, you haven't got this. But as I told the British, once we got independence, that will be our business, not theirs. And finally, as you realize, after they have given us independence, we beat the communists in no time. And now we are running the country as well as you could expect it to be run.
See? Tunku Abdul Rahman sounded more Angloid than I do, and yet I get called whitewashed for speaking no differently from Tunku Abdul Rahman. But anyway, yeah, the point is, it's true that people often lament that Malaysians spoke far better English in the 1960s and the 1970s, and the standard of English has declined ever since the British left. But I would argue that this is a very, very selective analysis because those people are only looking at the cream of the crop. No, I don't mean it as an insulting way to people of working class background, but they were only looking at the upper crusts of Malaysian society, like Tunku Abdul Rahman, the Prime Minister of Malaysia, or movie stars, or important public figures, right? I'm not sure if everybody across the board spoke Queen's English like Tunku Abdul Rahman's, but what I do know is that ever since the return of the syllabus to Malay, this has indeed caused some liberals to raise their eyebrows at our leadership, because the liberals accuse our leadership of being arrogant, solipsistic, and close-minded, and unwilling to accept progress, right? Because they see English as progress, right? But I think that's a very, very Eurocentric vision of progress. Because countries like South Korea and Japan have a lower level of English than we do, and yet they seem to be doing fine economically, right? Of course, they would be even better under socialism, but I'm just saying that, we don't look at South Korea and Japan and think, these are such backward, regressive countries. So I suspect that the liberals also still have a bit of a colonialized mentality, because they feel that Southeast Asian culture, the Malay culture, is backward and regressive. That's essentially how they feel. So, contrary to what the liberals say, Malay is actually not a bad language. There's no such thing as a bad language. In fact, if you have read poetry in Malay, if you've read classical Malay literature in Malay, you will think Malay is one of the most beautiful sounding languages in the world, right? One of the most beautiful poetic sounding languages in the world. Unfortunately, I think there's this mentality that the only way forward is to master English, or at least master some East Asian language, because many people still have this this mentality that Malay is a regressive culture, so to speak, right? I don't agree with that. What then will be our unifying language, right? Because in that time, in the colonial times, right, of course, English was seen as a symbol of class, right? If you spoke English fluently, you were seen as someone from the upper echelons of society. But times are changing, right? I don't think Xi Jinping, the president of China, speaks any English. I don't know if the president of North Korea speaks any English, but what I do know is that they seem to be getting on just fine without any English, right? So times are changing, and the emphasis on Anglo-Saxon culture is waning, right? Meaning that while Anglo-Saxon culture is not going extinct, it's not being treated as the default culture around the world, right? And it doesn't quite have that kind of reverence that it used to, right? At one point, if you owned a car in Malaya, right? If you were driving a car and you spoke good English, you were seen as an upper crust person already, right? But the point is, what will our language be? What will our uniting language be that will unite the Malaysian masses under socialism? And that will have to be left up to the masses to decide. Not me. I am not the masses. I am simply a particle among the masses, right? The people have to get together in a spirit of respect and understanding, and they have to ask themselves which language, Malay or English, will better serve our purpose in the near and far future, right? And I will submit to either, whether it's Malay or English, depending on what the masses have agreed upon. If it is Malay, very well. If it is English, very well also, right? But I really think that it should be a language that everybody will be able to understand, and everybody will be able to pick up. And I don't think that Mandarin or Tamil will be something that unites the masses, because not all of us will be able to understand you if you speak Mandarin or Tamil. If you speak Mandarin, I might understand maybe 20% of it. If you speak Tamil, I'll understand 0% of it. But the two likely choices for the lingua franca, the uniting lingua franca of socialist Malaysia, will be either English or Malay. And as socialists, we have to just conform to what the masses want, right? And that's not to say that English cannot be taught at school, right? I myself am an English teacher, so of course I would not want my own bread and butter to be demolished, right? But look, it's still important, I think, in order to pick the language, the uniting language, that is easier for everybody to learn and easier for everyone to master. Most Malaysians have got some mastery of Malay and some mastery of English, but we have to decide which one is easier to master for the largest number of people. What will the culture of the Malaysian socialist nation be? Well, I can tell you it certainly will not be something like the Soviet Union or Communist China or Communist Vietnam. No offense to those countries, but if we were to talk about abolishing the monarchy, right? At least in this current age we're living in, that would be most offensive to many people's minds in Malaysia, right? Because the idea of abolishing the monarchy is seen as an attack on Malay culture itself, because the monarchy is an inseparable part of the Malay culture. So the idea of abolishing the monarchy is something that I don't think we can achieve in this lifetime, right? And I don't think it's a very practical goal, because it will alienate most people in Malaysia, first of all. Second of all, it will make us look like a band of crazy anarchists, too many people in Malaysia. And third of all, the monarchs, right, are already constitutional monarchs. So they are already subjected to the rule of law, and they are already subjected to democratic institutions. And I think that there are good ways that the monarchs can be made use of in the new socialist Malaysia, right? For example, Britain is a country that's led by an Indian man with a white man's heart. Now, the power behind Great Britain certainly does not lie with King Charles. King Charles does not have any power beyond that of a figurehead, right? The power is really in Rishi Sunak's hands, right? But Rishi Sunak keeps King Charles around. Why? Because King Charles is just very, very useful as a symbol of British culture, right? British culture, which is very feudal in nature, and Malay culture is also very feudal in nature. Even though Britain is now a constitutional monarchy, they still keep the king around because he's a symbol of their culture. I think that there's a way that, the mythology of the Sultanate can be used in order to boost tourism revenue in Malaysia, right? The socialist country, not republic, the socialist constitutional monarchy of Malaysia. I believe there's a way that we can use the monarchy in order to boost our national revenue by basically capitalizing, pardon the pun, capitalizing on the awesome mythology of the sultans, basically, and making the monarchy a part of our soft culture. That way, everybody wins, right? The Malaysian masses don't get alienated because you're not going to touch the 9 sultans of Malaysia. And what's more, they will help to bring in revenue. And what they're doing is basically serving as symbols of the culture itself, right? So yeah, if you're going to ask me whether the monarchy should be abolished, as a socialist, I will tell you, of course it should. But as a Malaysian, I will also tell you that this is not a realistic aspiration, at least now. Because many people, right, still hold the monarchy to be quite an important aspect of the Malay culture. And to do so, to talk about abolishing the monarchy would be seen as a sign of profound disrespect, right? Now you could say, of course, that the Chinese of the Qing dynasty also believed that the Son of Heaven was an inseparable part of Chinese culture, and yet they successfully abolished the emperor. Right? But might I remind you that they did that because the emperor in the Qing dynasty was basically an autocrat who could do whatever he wanted, right? The Qing dynasty was not a constitutional monarchy. The Qing dynasty was a brutal celestial dictatorship. So that's why there was a violent rebellion by Dr. Sun Yat-sen in order to overthrow the corrupt and tyrannical Qing dynasty that were basically blood-sucking parasites living on the blood, sweat and toil of the masses. In Russia as well, the reason you could end the monarchy of Russia, right? You could put the Tsar in a room with his family and gun them all down without severe consequences, was because the people were already tired of the Tsar's brutality, the Tsar's cruelty. Tsarist Russia was also a brutal feudal dictatorship. So back then, the Tsar and the Emperor of China were already not popular with the people. So under those material conditions, of course you can talk about violent revolution. Or under the French Revolution, for example, when they cut off Louis the 16th's head off, I think it was 16, yeah. That was, of course, suitable for those material conditions. But these days, because the monarch is just a figurehead, I don't think it's practical to ruffle anybody's cultural sensitivities by talking about abolishing the monarchy. I think that the monarch should serve as no more than a symbol of the culture. In a sense, a symbol, a cultural symbol, if you will. But I don't think that the monarch, ought to have any special powers, right? Beyond being a cultural symbol, like the Emperor of Japan, for example. So yeah, abolishing the monarchy, I think, is a no-no. So I would caution Malaysian leftists and Malaysian socialists from adopting radical Marxism and saying things like Marxism is the only way forward, because that doesn't take into account the fact that Marx lived in a very, very different society from Malaysia with a very different set of material conditions. Marx lived in 19th century Germany, and so Marx's theories, while not wrong, I'm not saying they were wrong, are really more applicable, right, to a 19th century European context. But I'm not saying that you cannot take Karl Marx or Friedrich Engels as inspirations, but you have to be careful not to upset the sensitivities of the Malaysian masses. And so when you call for things like the abolition of the monarchy, that could be seen as quite confronting to the Malaysian masses, right? So, while we can certainly talk about the ownership of the means of production by the working class, I do think that that socialism in Malaysia cannot follow the same trajectory as socialism in the European republic countries. Like, if France were to someday become a socialist country, its form of socialism would be Republican socialism. That type of socialism will not be the same type of socialism as socialism with Malaysian characteristics, right? Because our socialism will be based on our own historical trajectory. So I do think that socialists should also be careful not to end up adopting Eurocentric visions of progress. And of course, while we can certainly do away with the more reactionary elements of our society, we still have to be careful to respect the cultural mores overall of the land. Because if you don't do that, well, you will end up alienating the masses, and you will not get them on your side. But do I believe that socialism is possible in our lifetime? Yes, I do. I certainly do, because I believe in my own people, right? Oh, these are Victorian. These have been around since the Victorian times. See, these are these figures, all these, what do you call them? I think we call them marble, what do you call these? Would you describe it as a pot? Yes, it's a pot. These marble pots have been around since Victorian times, yes. The decoration of the of botanical gardens is actually meant to replicate that of a European public park that the colonizers missed. Just like how, you know, the Zionists have turned Israel into a basically another European country, because fundamentally Zionists are European in their thinking and in their hearts, right? So they feel more comfortable with European norms and European ways of life. So that's why Israel is the most westernized Middle Eastern country. I do believe that socialism is possible in Malaysia, because fundamentally Asian countries are more collectivistic. And so, although people like Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels believed that socialism would take place in the Western developed first world countries in the beginning, I disagree with that. I think that the soil in Asian countries is actually more fertile for socialism, because in an individualistic kind of society, it is harder to basically get a communistic mentality. So it's going to be harder to get that that kind of mentality if you're in an individualistic Western society. So you see that countries that would have become socialist, or countries that were predicted to have become socialist by now, such as France, such as they ended up, well, becoming full-blown neocon right-wing capitalist countries, right? So yeah, it's possible because the cultural DNA is there. The only thing that's necessary is basically to awaken the masses and show them that socialism is really the way forward, and it will not only be good for the society, but for themselves, right, and their families. The culture of socialism in our socialist society will be a unique one, because it will be a unique amalgamation of many different traditions and ways of life and beliefs, all mutually respected, right? But at the same time, we will also have a certain national consciousness, a certain Malaysian consciousness, that we see ourselves as Malaysian first and Malay, Chinese or Indian second. That's my vision for the socialist Malaysia. The question is, can we achieve socialism in our lifetime? I believe so. I'm confident that, if we play our cards right and we do all the necessary things to be done, I think we can get socialism by the year 2050, right? I'll be 60 years old by then. But I believe it will be possible. At least I believe even if we don't get full socialism, we will at least get some degree of it by 2050, right? At least by our grandchildren's lifetime, socialism would have come full swing, right? So yes, the soil is ripe for socialism because Malaysians are selfless, caring and charitable people, and they only need to be pointed in the right direction for socialism to happen. But socialism will not compromise their devotion to their own culture, whether that be the Malay or the Chinese or the Peranakan or the Indian culture. No, it will not force them to give up their culture. It will not compromise their families. It will not compromise their religion even. Because being a socialist and being religious are not mutually exclusive. Abdullah Sidi, for example, was a very pious Muslim man, but he was also a very, very devoted socialist at the same time. And he died a Muslim. He did not die as a non-believer. So yeah, it's not to say that the socialism will mean that, oh, you lose your culture, you lose your family, and everybody becomes a property of the commune, right? No. Our families, our cultures, and our livelihoods will remain intact. And in fact, under socialism, we will have more free time to spend with our families and more quality time to be spent with loved ones, right? That is the vision that I have for Malaysia, and that is the vision that I believe will be possible. And we will get there, my friends. Thank you.